All right. Well, good evening. My name is Sam McGlynn, November Mike 5 November, and I'm going to give a talk about WSJTX and GRIDTRACKER. So what are we going to talk about? These can be very deep topics, so I'm going to kind of discuss what it is that we're going to get into. I'm going to get into overviews. First off, about the scope for each of these different tools. What is WSJTX, the overview, why you might want to use it. What are some of the key things to remember if you want to be successful at it? And I'm also going to give you some resources that you can dig into this, because what you're really going to get today is really just a taste of these things. There's a lot more to it, but I'm going to kind of give you the key points there. And then for GRIDTRACKER, basically the same thing. And at the end of this, we're actually going to step in the radio room and actually practice this, so you can kind of see what all the stuff we're about to talk about. Okay, so the scope. This is an introduction. We're not going to get into the details. If you go on YouTube and you type in these different topics, you can find a lot of detail, and specifically about, like, how to do it on certain radios. We're not going to get into those kind of details, because I recognize that people have different radios. But if you typically, you can just go and search like WSJTX in your radio, and you put that in Google, you're going to find someone has done this before. So that's really is kind of the easiest way to get started about how to configure radios. So we're really not going to get into that. It's more about what are these things, why you'd want to use it, and really not so much about the how, except for some key points to remember. We're going to get into some of the capabilities and really not get into all of them, but you'll see lists of them. And if you go on these resources that we're pointing to, you could really kind of use, you can get a lot more detail about how to practice this. And like I said, those resources will be linked in this presentation, so you can go click on them. You can dig into this as much as you want. I probably also should add, before I get into this, that about a month ago, my exposure to this was basically zero. And I have to thank Bill, Whiskey Zulu 5 Whiskey, right, for drafting me into this project. And really, this has given me an excuse to really, something I've wanted to get into for quite a while. And now I had a reason to do this. So it's been, I'm obviously a lot more educated about this than I was a while ago, but I'm sure there's probably folks in this room that know parts of this at least as well as I do. So if I say something wrong, I know they're going to correct me. So what is WSJTX? It's an acronym, stands for Weak Signal Communication by K1JT. So WSJT, and then the X part is basically reflecting that this is an extended branch of an earlier version of the program called WSJT. And this is kind of the common interface you see for WSJT. We're going to get into some of these details. So an overview. The gentleman on the right is Joe Taylor, famous astrophysicist, won the Nobel Prize in physics. So he developed this product in many of the different modes, weak signal modes that this tool supports. So this is a way to interface with these digital modes. Some of the key protocols it's optimized for, like this weak signal, like EME, moon bounce, meteor scatter, ionospheric scatter, VHF, UHF, as well as low frequency, medium frequency, high frequency. Some of the modes, there's a whole list of modes there. The one I'm going to kind of get into a little bit more detail is on FT8, because that's the one that everybody knows about. But just understand that this WSJTX is not just for FT8, but we'll get into more details there. Some resource. There's the main page for WSJTX, and the user guide is also on there, but it's linked here. Okay, so why would you want to use WSJTX? It is the tool that, if you want to use a digital mode like FT8, this is how you would do it, right? And if you're new to getting on HF, FT8 is kind of like, it's the big rage right now. So if you want to make contacts, it's one of the great places to start. Let's see. It's also like if you have a quote compromised station, you have a compromised antenna, it's really ideal, right? So you don't need to have the best, you don't need a contest station, you don't need to have a tower. If you can hang up a wire or a buddy stick or whatever, you will make contacts. It's an extremely efficient mode to make contacts. And if you want to make a lot of contacts, because so many operators are on it, this is great. If you want to get some DX, you want to contact foreign countries, this is a really great tool to get on it. All right, so some of the key things to remember. So we're pointing to some of these resources, but some of the key things to remember is the criticality of time. So modes like FT8 and FT4, it's critical that you make sure that the time is synchronized so that stations that are transmitting and listening, they're doing that in synchronous with each other. This part here is actually, I'm highlighting a certain field that you see on this interface. So this is kind of the main interface here, but right here in the band activity, you'll see there's this field. This reflects the time difference, and you want to make sure that that is a very low number. If you see most of those numbers are really low, that means that you're pretty much in sync. But if most of these numbers are off like 1 second to 1.0, 2.0, it's probably your time, right? So you need to make sure that you have an effective way to make sure that your time is synchronized. There's some free software out there. If you just search for net time and dimension 4, you can just download these things and install them. It's a good way to make sure that you're synchronized. If you want to work portable, like you're working at some station, maybe you're far enough out where you're not able to even do like a cellular digital mode. There's options for using GPS as well, but that's a different topic. This right here is just a resource, a really good YouTube video, just how to get started with WSJTX.
So the reason that time is such critical is it's going to transmit for 15 seconds and it's going to listen for 15 seconds. But if your clock is not synchronized, you're transmitting when everybody else is expecting you to be listening. And so you sort of jump all over everybody. And so what you do is you synchronize with the atomic clock. You're both set up, and that way the 15 seconds when you think you're listening, you're really listening rather than transmitting. And so it's intentionally designed to be 15-minute increments, and they want you aligned with everyone else.
That net time synchronization sounds like it's going through the internet.
Yeah. So you're
15-second window sitting here. I mean, you could have a lot of latency in the internet time, right?
right, but the way that those tools work is it factors in the delay. So when it figures out what time it is, it knows what the delay is to wherever it's getting its reference time.
It's able to figure out what the latency is.
Right, it subtracts that latency back out. So and then what it's doing is it's making sure that it is checking and synchronizing at a higher frequency than perhaps your default Windows installation, or if it's non-Windows, Mac or Linux, it's making sure that it's updated frequently.
It's not coming from the GPS though. It is actually coming off the internet.
Right. Yeah. So it's coming off the internet, but it actually is a fairly reliable time source because the top time, there's a hierarchy in the network timing system. The reference time is like directly synchronized with things like atomic clocks and GPS or whatever. And then what it does is the system actually factors out that known latency to get the time really quite close.
You're synchronizing your PC with the atomic clock.
No, I understand that, but the latency varies.
Right, but it's
not fixed. It varies depending on what the internet traffic is.
Yeah, the network time we're getting into maybe more details about it, but it's able to figure out what that delay is and then pull that back out.
And it works.
Yeah, it works. So that's the main thing. If you just install these, I myself use the first one, NetTime, very, very simple. It just runs as a service in Windows. It's entirely in the background once you've configured it. And I use the first one, NetTime.
Okay.
That's the one I set up. It just basically runs in the back. Once you've got it running, you don't even see it. It just kind of runs.
That's just an app that I can download off the internet.
Yeah, if you just Google NetTime, you'll see, you'll get to it, and then you can set the configuration that you want to use. Like you may want to have it, if it's more than a certain amount, it's going to update or whatever. But you'll see it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Okay. The other critical thing with WSJTX is your audio levels. So the first one, like you'll see this on the menu. This appears in the very bottom left. But this is basically what is your microphone hearing, and you want to make sure that you've got it basically around. A good rule of thumb is about basically at 60. If you see that indicator is like showing yellow or red, that's a problem. So typically between 50 and 75 is kind of what you want to have it set at. The other kind of key factor is on the audio that you're actually putting out, that you want to make sure that this is just the slider this is in the very bottom right, but you're going to be adjusting this so that when you're transmitting that your ALC indicator on your radio is, if it's ticking, it's just barely ticking. That's the automatic limiting. I think I've got it on here. Put it in the notes. Automatic level control. Automatic level control is not having to work. If it's working, if it's starting to work more actively, it's going to distort, and what you're going to show up as like splatter all over the band, and you're actually be a lot harder to hear. So you want to make sure you have that calibrated so that the ALC is barely ticking on your radio.
So that's what it is while you're, say, in the transmission uptime, you're moving that slider and then watching the ALC on your radio to get it as low. ALC, should it be ideally 0 or?
It's basically, I've heard different opinions. I think it also depends on your radio, but some will say you want to see it barely tick and you want to take it off once so that it's not there, or if it's just like 1 bar, like on an ICOM 7300, maybe you'll just see like 1 bar.
Okay.
So, but you don't want it approaching even a quarter of that of your scale of your meter. Yeah.
This is one place I've been having a lot of trouble with my FT991, and that is getting that correct audio level. Where are you going to adjust that mic level?
So the mic level is actually you're adjusting that in your Windows sound configuration.
Okay, that's what I was afraid of.
Yeah, we can take a look after as well. So you're just kind of sliding that so that you're seeing this moving up and down.
Yeah, I can't get it to stay in one place. When I shut down and go start all over again, it's all wide open.
Yeah, well, I don't.
And then I don't remember.
Well, the other key thing that I'm not going to get into here, but there's a setting in WSJTX for audio where you're selecting the codecs, and then you have to make sure you're using the right codec for your radio and for your configuration. And if that gets messed up, then that also can be a problem. And the other key thing is this is kind of it's a bit buried here, but this is the other kind of it looks like a little waterfall band scope. You can see all the activity that's happening in WSJTX. These little indicators, just kind of point them out here. This little red indicator here, this shows where you're transmitting, and this shows where you're listening. But of the two, it's actually, there's a reason why you might want to be messing with this, but I'm not going to get into that. This is the kind of the key one, that this shows where you're going to transmit.
Which one does?
The red one, this red one right here. And what you can actually see on this band scope is you can actually kind of see all the activity and where it's more busy and less busy. But if you want to be heard, I mean, it just kind of makes sense, right? I want to be transmitting where people aren't currently active, right? I don't want to be clicking on where there's already like there's activity. Here there's activity. I wouldn't want to select some place that there's already activity. Doesn't mean you can't be heard, but it's going to be harder because you're competing with other people that are transmitting. So what you can do is you can like find an empty spot and then basically just control click on that. On like for instance, I would look at this and I go, okay, I want to control left click here. And when I'm transmitting, I've got a better, because the way this works is everybody's hearing all of this, right? So if you're running WSJTX, you're hearing everybody, right? So it's not really so important to select where you're listening, because you're hearing everybody. But you want to be transmitting in a part of the band that is not being used, right? So control left click selects where you're transmitting. And if you want, you can actually kind of make some minor adjustments in these settings down here. The other kind of key thing, which is not on by default, is you click this box, hold transmit frequency. If you don't click that box, every time you're clicking on different places, you're changing your transmit frequency to whoever's calling CQ. And that's really not useful, because now say the next time you're calling, if you want to call CQ, you're going to be calling CQ in the same place that person was calling CQ. So it's not a good thing. And checking this box will increase your chances of making more contacts and being heard.
So part of the mechanism that's going on here is everybody operates on one frequency on the band. And so it's like 18074 is the frequency that people do digital on. That signal that comes across is sort of a coded signal, and your PC is hearing that through the microphone. It is taking that signal and decoding it and bringing back out text out of that for you to listen to. And it ends up at that same frequency. There's this thing that goes from 0 here to 3000. That's actually subdivisions within that frequency where you have multiple communications occurring. And if you're trying to transmit on an area that's all red, you're trying to transmit on top of 10 other people that are already talking. And so he's saying, move so that little red marker at the top is not on top of everyone else, and you got a better chance somebody's going to hear you. And if your microphone is too high, this is designed for a very weak signal. This is designed so that with a cheap radio, a cheap antenna, you're able to talk to Russian in bad atmospheric conditions. And if you turn everything up real high, you're blowing everybody else on the band off because they're expecting this all to be a weak signal. So that's sort of some of the stuff that's going behind this on how they were able to achieve communications for somebody who doesn't have a fancy antenna on a 500-foot tower, is able to talk to Russia. This Nobel laureate figured out a way, and this is the technique that he's using in order to do that.
The other thing you're gonna here is that it also says relative to the next talk about this is the enable PSK order response. So what this does, it kind of helps the whole community of operators, because what you're doing is everybody that you're automatically hearing, it actually puts up in the PSK recorder. So if they want, they can actually look to see who is hearing that. And conversely, you can go on PSK recorder. So even if you're not talking to some station, they're working with somebody else. You can look at, there's a button to click the grid tracker to get to that, where you can see all over the world. Really kind of a cool thing. From a practical perspective, you kind of get a sense of what bands are open, who I might be able to talk to, maybe even the different bands. You could be working with digital, you want to go to voice, you have to say, well, where are the electrons?
Can you hear me, Sam?
Go ahead, Anthony.
Sam, can you hear me?
Yes.
You are echoing and you're unreadable.
Say again? All right. Yeah, so, but just remember to check this thing. Everybody should be, there's no reason not to check it. It's a good thing. Just check that box. Okay, so. Sure. All right. So now we're going to get into GRIDTRACKER. So this, the two is kind of a newer phenomenon, the newer capability developed by N0TTL. Website gridtracker.org. This is just one visualization I found on the internet. Just kind of, you see here, just a little bit of the map view and the control panel there on the right. But we're going to get into some details here. So when I've gone through a number of different videos and, you know, folks kind of talking about this, like, well, what is this, right? How do I explain what this is? So some of the quotes I saw, you want to see what's happening everywhere at the same time. So it's not just who are you talking to or who's here. It's like you can kind of see all the activity, everything that's coming into your coming in just JTX, which just looks like a whole list of call signs, and you know, you can actually see it gets displayed on a map. You can actually visualize what's happening. So it kind of turns it into a kind of a more like a video game. It's like the Matrix, a QSO helper, a way to make it easier to make contacts of people or stations you want to, or countries or states or grids that you want to talk to. Again, I mentioned it kind of visualizes these relationships that you see in this list in WSJTX. Another kind of key thing that it does is it provides a way to take your logbook, all modes, so not just digital. So you can import your logs and put all your contacts on this map and see all the countries that you've talked to by grids or counties or states. You could look at all these different, there's ways to look at the awards that you might be able to get and actually see, like by zones or whatever, pull in all your logs, you know, signal sideband, CW, all the digital modes, and actually see them on a map. Very useful. So it's not, even though it is, a lot of it is kind of an a capability on top of WSJTX for digital, it actually does more than just digital. And the other kind of key thing, it actually can talk back to WSJTX, and you can see stations that are calling. You just click on them, and it provides a message back to WSJTX and actually initiates those contacts. So it's not just a display; it's a way to interface and make contacts with WSJTX. More of a kind of visual, GUI, more of an intuitive interface than perhaps WSJTX is by itself. It also has an alert capability. Say you want to, I'm trying to, like, you know, here's a good example for me. I've made contacts with every state except Alaska. Well, I have a compromised station, but one thing that I could do is I could put in this list, say, I want to look for, if I can hear Alaska, I want to hear an audible alarm. So I can jump on that and make a contact, right? Get my worked all states. It supports not just FT8, but also most of the other WSJTX modes as well. And it works on all of these different Windows, Mac, Linux, and Raspberry Pi. So this is just another longer list. I've extracted this from GRIDTRACKER.org. Mapping of real-time historical contacts. So again, pulls up all your logs and puts this on a map. You can kind of see who you've talked to. Many overlays. The gray line, so you can kind of see where the day-night boundary. Why do we care about that? Because that often, if you're operating on the gray line, you can make contacts that were perhaps a lot harder to make otherwise. So there's some new opportunities with the gray lines over there, and you kind of see that. Again, mentioned award tracking, lightning strikes. Where's the moon? If you want to do EME, I mentioned the PSK reporter spots and NexRad. So in the United States, you can actually put NexRad radar right in the map. So it's kind of like a way to see what's going on from weather perspective.
Lightning strikes too.
Lightning strikes, yeah. So that's just another overlay that you can select. Detailed state grid and county information that you can visualize what's going on there. Customized alerts, mentioned that. You can look up call signs, the call roster, which we're going to get into more details there. You can initiate, mention that, initiating QSOs. It talks to many of the different logging programs. Like for instance, I use Logbook of the World. So when I make a contact, it's automatically sending the logs up there. And so I don't have to take a separate step to go in and then upload my logs. It's all happening automatically, which is really handy. Offline mode. So if you're offline, you don't have digital, you don't have online access, it will function. Off-air messaging system. So you can actually, one of the things, if you elect to do that, is you can see all the other operators that are out there, and you can send them like a text message or digital, like an instant message if you want to communicate with them, maybe kind of work a schedule to try and make a contact. So that's kind of a neat feature. And real-time spotting above the grid tracker and lock forum users. So if you want to spot them.
Jason, your to-go kit has Raspberry Pi doing digital button. So you're actually doing, now you use GRIDTRACKER.
This is the first I've heard of this. So.
Okay, cool. All right.
All right. So this is kind of this is just pulled from the GRIDTRACKER.org. This is one view. This here is this is the main window. If you pull this up, this is kind of what you see. There's a map on the left. This one is specifically for the United States, but this gets zoomed in and out. You can look at the whole world. Also, you can customize these maps. So you can do all kind of maps that you might want to use, like even old-fashioned maps, or I like to kind of use a dark mode map. Kind of makes it feel a little bit more high tech, or like you're in the Matrix. That's my personal preference. Box colors indicate grid status. So by the way, all this is customizable. Say you don't like this color means this. All this, you can change all of it, right? So you don't have to stick with that layout that they've got there. Go ahead.
So you probably said this. Is this a program you actually like download and install on your PC, or
Yeah.
just like a web interface?
It's a program.
Okay.
Oh, and it's all open source, free.
As I mentioned, it's available on all these different platforms: Windows, Linux, Mac, Raspberry Pi. Box colors indicate status. So for instance, in this configuration, the yellow contacts, like these are ones that I have talked to all these grids. So this is kind of a neat way to take a look at this. It'll take your grid locations when the live message decodes done in WSGTX and map them on the grid tracker in real time. So that's what's happening. So this is being updated in real time based on these decodes that are happening in WSGTX.
So Sam had mentioned there are awards for contacting every state. There's an award for contacting every grid throughout the United States or every county. There's contests for contacting the 13 original colonies during a certain weekend, or historic ships. And so this keeps track of all that for you, and it'll sit there and say, okay, you talk to these 12 of the 13 colonies. And so all of that gets tied into this at the same time. So it helps you with the contest.
All right. And this is just kind of a blown up view of this control panel that you see on the right. This is some of the, I'm not talking about all of the different features here, but just a few of them. The band activity, this is actually really handy. Like one of the big questions I have, I want to get on ham radio. I can pull this up and go, well, what's even open right now? What bands are even open? This is hugely useful. Right up here, I don't know, you can kind of see like this, what's circled is, hey, I'm on 40 now, but man, why I should be on 20 meters. So if I have a 20 meter antenna, I need to get on there because there's a lot of activity. I want to make some contacts, right? Very useful, very handy feature. QSO status. This is right up in here. Received calls, number of call signs received in WSJT in your current start grid tracker, and total number of contacts to date. So kind of a running total of what's going on. The map view filters. So this is where you can select, like, do I want to look at my logbook or do I want to look at live data? You can select that. I mentioned the different modes. So it's not, like I said, it's not just digital. I want to look at CW. I want to look at phone. I can select those different options and kind of get different views on things. And grid tracker features menu. So this is this is a configurable menu of different options here. Some of the key ones to point out, this is really, this call roster is really one of the, I think it's really the heart of, even though it's not the map, it's really kind of I think the most useful feature of this tool to identify contacts that you might want to talk to. Another one, this is the awards thing, where we talked to the awards overlay, where you can basically look at your logs and see what else do I need to talk to, where do I need confirmations and the like. The PSK reporter right here, PSK, who's hearing me? That's a really cool feature to say, am I even being effective? I'm transmitting, can anybody even hear me? So even if they're not responding to you, if they can hear you automatically, if they have that box check that you saw before, you're going to see like, oh, I'm being heard. This is really kind of, when I first started getting on HF, it's really kind of a cool thing to say, hey, my signal is being heard on the far side of the planet. Even if I'm not talking to them, I'm being heard there, right? So I know I'm being effective with my radio, with my antenna. And if I'm not, that's also very useful as well. Hey, I'm not being heard at all. Okay, I need to maybe put this aside and take a look at my antenna, take a look at my setup to see if I need to make some changes. So I mentioned call roster, cycle award overlay, and PSK report spots. All right. So this is the call roster, very configurable tool. This is where you'll spend a lot of your time to identify who's out there, who's talking to who, and actually select where you can start selecting down to, hey, I want to make certain contacts. This is you can see it says wanted over here. You can check these boxes. Like, okay, if you check that grid box, all right, it's going to start filtering down to grids that, or highlighting grids that you've not reached, right? So those will be brought to the front, and then you can more easily select and make contacts with those that you have not talked to. DXCC country, that's like countries you've not talked to yet. States, like like for me, I would check that box. I need to talk to Alaska to get my works all states. I'm 49 out of 50. I'm this close. And then exceptions where you can exclude, so for instance, one thing you might want to do is if they're too far down in the noise, then I know I'm not going to be successful in trying to contact them. So I might want to filter them out, or like uses logbook of the world. I might check that and say, well, if they're not uploading to logbook of the world, I'm not going to get credit for that contact. So maybe I don't want to, or maybe I don't want to prioritize them. So very handy feature. And when you want to make a contact, say you see someone calling CQ, you can just click single click on their call sign. It's going to send that message directly to WSJTX and initiate that contact. So this is how this becomes an interface on top of WSJTX and making it a bit easier to make those contacts of who you want to talk to.
What is the frequency column there? I mean, it's not obviously the frequency you're working on.
Well, I think that's
in the band scope where it shows it's actually where they're.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can, if that's useful to you. Oh, by the way, all this is configurable, right? There's some fields that are not being shown here that you can add on here. One that I've started using, this is very useful to me. I've got kind of a compromised setup. If I click that field, it'll actually sort all them by the signal. All right. So if it's I'll see the ones at the top of the list will be the ones with the strongest signals that I can hear. Because if I'm hearing them pretty strong, then odds are that they'll hear me more strongly than the ones that are down in the noise. So another useful feature, way to use it. Live data. This is just I borrowed this from another presentation I found. Credit to KB1 OIQ. But what you're seeing here is this is kind of the live data where you're actually seeing all of these different stations talking to each other. This is where it really becomes kind of like a video game, right? Where you can see that table list that you see in WSJTX. You see this is actually what's happening, right? these stations, like in the United States, all the United States are talking in Europe, you know, Poland or Ukraine, whatever, but it really can see that. And what you'll see happening is those colors will change, right? So if it's other stations talking to each other, but not you, it's a certain color. And if I'm calling them, it'll be like, okay, it'll turn, like for me, I set it to go red. And if they're responding, you can actually see that happening, where it's like the signal kind of going back and forth, which really kind of makes it more, I think more interesting, right? So it can just takes that list and turns into something which I think is a lot more intuitive, right? You can really see what's happening. So I think that's the last slide here. I'm going to get into, I think the next phase we're going to get into is demos, but I do want to point out before we do that, there's the last slide here is some resources. Another presentation, some videos that kind of talk about this. And then there's also a Groups IO page if you want to get into that, where there's a really good forum to ask questions and really get more out of these different tools. So before we go ahead.
I did want to ask you about the WSJTX. Now, that software still hasn't been updated since what, like 2008 or 13?
No, it's updated, like they just updated it last month.
Oh, okay.
So it's constantly being updated. And GRIDTRACKER is also the original guy who created it is now, I think there's a team of 10 volunteer developers that are making updates to it now. So, all right. So those are the resources. Are there any questions before we're going to actually see a demo now? We're actually going to see how this works, and so you'll have an opportunity to kind of see this stuff in action. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, does this GRIDTRACKER, since it's keeping track of, I mean, it's updating all the world, right?
Well, you have to set that up, right? So like it's actually compatible with like Log4M, Logbook of the World, QRZ, Club Club Log.
So is it giving me a file I can suck into my standard logging software?
It can. It's compatible with certain. I think it's also Ham Deluxe. What's that? Ham Radio. I believe it's also compatible with that, but it'll automatically push updates to that.
Yeah, there's a section where you put all your logs for all these different logs, and you actually test them. You can get the test connection and test. And then
Sam, can you hear me?
Hold on, Anthony.
when you click OK, it goes automatically to all this place.
But then he wants to grab another.
Does it go back to my ham radio log?
Yes. It'll automatically update your logs there.
I say automatically, it creates a file. You can load it.
But normally it doesn't automatically link to ham radio log. It just creates a file that I can import.
Yeah.
Okay. Good enough. Thank you.
I know in the case of Log4M, it's automatically up like Log4M. It'll actually automatically update that.
If ever goes to read it, I don't know.
Because there's a section where you put all your login and password for all these websites, and it says the connection, and it sends it live. I mean, by the time you go, when you click OK on your contact, and then you go to that local, it's already there by the time you get it, like QRZ, it's already there. But if in case it fails, it gives a file as well with the file. I just wanted to get into my log on ham radio log. That's what I mean.
Yeah. So perhaps there's one more step that might be required there.
That's all right.
But yeah.
As long as that's there. It's
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really, it's a really polished product. I think I'm really impressed with it. All right, Anthony, you had a question?
No, I got a comment for Bud, I believe. I'm having trouble hearing people in the background asking questions, talking, or it's echoing and then you can't understand what's being said. But my comment that I have, Bill has configured it to work with GRIDTRACKER, HRD, as well as the WJSTX program, and they will all work together in unison.
Right. Is that a question?
No, he was just saying.
Okay.
But I was,
But he has it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I can't show the live portion on the Zoom also.
Yeah, unfortunately, Anthony, we can't show that on the Zoom, but there's other videos out there to and actually the links in this presentation have got include demonstrations of contact. So
Hey, Sam, I'll leave the stream going. leave your mic on, so at least if you don't give a verbal play-by-play, they get something on.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, any more questions or comments before we look at the demo? Okay, well, let's go ahead and transition into the radio room. And we will take a look at some of these features.